press the button. Okay. Our usual start then. Just check your posture as you start to turn, and use the movement to help you to just get into the right posture. It's not always the same, actually. I mean, just I quite often I start off and I'm kind of shuffling around and settling down. I'm quite prepared if I'm standing here and after a few minutes I think, hold on a second, this isn't right, as it comes to my notice, then I'll change it. There's various factors that will affect this. You might find it appropriate to analyze some of them. But one of the main things I think is just to be aware of what you're aiming for when you've got the experience that you've all got. Come on. So you have an idea of what you're looking for and perhaps an idea of what you're wanting to get out of it. Obviously, particularly, I doubt we're doing it today, but if we did any new exercises, or if there were new people in the group or new people watching, slightly different. And initially for all of us, I think, however long you've been doing this, one of the things to look for is just a feeling of space, so that the movement isn't a strain. This is not about the classic kind of idea that we have with, say, fitness stuff of sort of going for the burn, or can you improve your performance. I'm not saying that sort of stuff is wrong, but it's not appropriate for Tai Chi. There's a saying, Chinese saying, that is often quoted in reference to Tai Chi, Qigong, which is more is less and less is more. And that also fits in with something that many of you have heard me say before, which is the thing about small movements being better than big movements. It's a bit like the saying, if you look after the pennies, the pounds will look after themselves. If you focus on the small movements, the big movements come. They're there. But the full saying says that no movement is better than small movement. The implication shouldn't be that we're going to be not moving at all, but it's pointing at what comes before the movement, which is what we call intent in Tai Chi. And this brings us back to, what's appropriate for you at the moment. What do you want to get out of the session? Is it a time for sort of like working on a particular thing, or is it just a time for just enjoying yourself? And well, you should enjoy yourself anyway, but just to coast along. Sometimes it's nice to do that. You don't always have to make advances. So that will help to shape your overall intent. So intent is what happens inside somewhere. I won't try and say where, before we act. So, if you fancy a cup of tea, you're going to go and make a cup of tea. Your intent will take you into the kitchen and find the tea in the kettle and so on and so forth. And it's quite a powerful agency. I'm not trying to say that it's the be all and end all, because intent is nothing without the action that comes afterwards. It's just an intellectual exercise in those circumstances. But I'm sure we've all had the experience of, an example of sometimes you really think it's time to go and clean out that cupboard or whatever, and you're not really kind of focusing on it, but that's what you're intending to you think you're intending to do, and then you find yourself in the kitchen making a cup of tea. And it's like, the intent to make a cup of tea, subconscious though it was much stronger than the intent to clean out the cupboard, for instance, or whatever. So that focusing and that decision making really is one of the things that we start to bring into the preparation. I won't say warm up in this context. You might also find that, I'm just trying to adapt my right knee every now and then. Okay, this is a good example of how things can change. For some reason, my right knee, this one, is every now and then doing this, and it shouldn't be. My left knee isn't doing it, but my right knee is doing it. So I'm like, what? Why? I can't quite work. So if I'm shuffling around because I'm trying to find the right positioning for my feet, I think that's probably a little bit better. So these things all come into this. But as we gradually settle down, we sort of go beneath the surface of the movements. And this again is to do with the focus of our attention. Remember, when we arrive at a session, you've had to, I don't know, you've had to sort of just chatting to somebody about getting the computer set up properly and making sure, I don't know, you're not going to be disturbed, or if there's somebody else in the house that they know what you're doing, or all of those kind of things. You've had to do some planning and make some effort to be here at this time. So think about the basics of the posture to the extent that you can. And again, it depends a great deal on your experience combined with what is appropriate. We weight just slightly forwards in your feet. This is exaggerated, by the way. It's about just over half your weight, about 70% of your weight in the front half of your feet, giving you this slightly angled position, which will eventually, of course, tire you out and put you forwards. But we actually let our hips drop back a little bit. You can see when my hips drop back, this happens. I come more to the upright position. A slight feeling of overhanging in buttocks, hips, and lower back, and a feeling of dropping down through your hips and your pelvis. So your center of gravity just beginning to drop initially below your hips, because that will help to loosen up your hips. That's just an automatic response. If I said you hold this heavy box above your head and you were doing this, okay, relax your shoulders. Oh, I can't because I've got this heavy box up there. Take it down there and your shoulders are more likely to relax. Drop your center of gravity from, say, your chest down to below your hips, and the same thing will happen with your hips, with the ultimate aim being to create a posture and a feeling of releasing in your body, so that your center of gravity goes below your knees, below your ankles, and eventually below the ground. Your intent is to get your center of gravity below your ground, in the same way that if you watch somebody playing tennis and they go to hit the ball, their intent is to send the ball over the net and right past their opponent in the tennis match. They're not going to go, oh, I'm just going to hit the ball like that. They'll sweep through a lot more. So sometimes I've seen it said your center of gravity, your root, should be 6 feet below the ground. So that's where you kind of have an image. I sometimes imagine my root as being an object like a steel ball, like a ball bearing, but something quite heavy that's attached to the tail of my spine and is dropping down through a hole between my legs and sort of pulling me down to the ground. So this is an ongoing process in Tai Chi, and arguably one of the critical processes. For this exercise, we can feel the change quite often in our body as we do this. Now just turn your hands palm forwards, raise them up a little bit, and this is the position that you're looking for. Hands in front of your shoulders, elbows in front of your shoulders, elbows hanging down. And at the same time, as you raise your hands, don't do this, see my shoulders going up, but actually look for a feeling of releasing and dropping again in your hips. Have your arms out at a comfortable angle, and you'll find this will help to just open up the chest a little bit. And then just drop your hands down. So working with the technical side of your posture, the details of your posture achieves two things. One is you gradually improve your posture, and that's just an ongoing process. The other is the act of trying to improve your posture and at the start of a session really gives you something to focus on. So again, all those, the bustle of the morning and so on and so forth just recedes a little bit. So that feeling of spaciousness, as I described it, isn't just a physical feeling, but just a certain amount of sort of free space within your attention. Those details are still there, maybe noises from outside or whatever, but we have this little kind of pool of space, silence, however you care to think about it. So this basic stance, referred to as the Wu Chi stance. So it's either W-U-J-I or W-U-C-H-I. Wu Chi is symbolized in Chinese cosmology by an empty circle. And the progression in that approach is that you go from the empty circle to the circle divided into two, what we refer to as the yin-yang circle. You can see an example of it on my shirt just there. It's a very familiar symbol, and that's the Tai Chi symbol. So we go from Wu Chi, which is, I mean, some people describe it as nothingness or whatever, to movement, because the Tai Chi circle implies a dynamic movement between yin and yang. And then just sink down a little bit more and push up. So that idea of the empty circle, the Wu Chi, underpins everything that we do. But we start to move, and that's quite challenging because it can be difficult to maintain that sense of spaciousness. We do all sorts of it. We go down, oh, God, this is hard on the legs, hard on the knees, whatever. Sometimes we'll find ourselves doing this or this, crouching forward or straining in our shoulders. Just take it nice and easily and let the movement itself, the sinking down and the pushing up, just begin to regularize itself into a nice, steady, quite calming rhythm. One that helps to generate a fluidity of movement through your body, parts of your body, if not the whole body. But you can feel your body gradually settling down and then expanding outwards. If it suits you to work with your breathing, then you can try this. Now, the trouble with saying breathe like this is that if it's not comfortable for you, you'll end up forcing yourself. So what I would suggest in the first instance is that as you push up and your body expands, just see how it feels to take a breath in. If that begins to feel okay for you, then the next logical thing is to breathe out as you contract or as you sink down. And you may find you can do that for a round or two, and then it gets a bit difficult if your in-breath or your out-breath are slightly too long or too short to match the movement. you could play around with the movement, but give it time. Then you might find that you start to deviate from that breathing pattern. That's fine, so long as you're still breathing. There's plenty of opportunities through the session to bring your attention back to that. And I'll just remind you every now and then of that, for those of you who are comfortable with this. But for now, bring your hands around and pushing up, expanding. So that will be in breath and contracting. You're looking for a feeling in the movement that there's no straining caused by resistance or by anything else if it comes to that. We use the image of moving through water. So it's not that there's no resistance, there's always resistance somewhere. There's the resistance of the air around you, even if you don't notice it. Point is that when you move through water, we know kind of instinctively almost that any kind of stiffening, any kind of tightening in our body will actually make it harder work to move through water. We automatically begin to soften in joints, muscles. So we meet the resistance with a kind of resilience, a kind of strength that doesn't in and of itself restrict movements. Think of a balloon. The balloon is actually quite a strong structure because you can push into a balloon, you can push a finger into a balloon, and it will also get stronger as you push in, but at no point will it give you the sort of resistance that you might get. It's not like pushing your finger into a wall, for instance, where you instantly feel sort of like it's quite sore and you know that you have to start straining. It should never feel like that with Tai Chi. So we can begin to focus our awareness on that idea and notice, well, is there a strain? For instance, as I go down, if I'm tight in my back, and now I'm tight in my back, but you'll observe that my hips are pushing out. And I think, well, hold on, that's not good because it's tight in my back. So can I just change that? In fact, this posture should be a perfectly natural posture. So more often than not, and more successfully than most other approaches, what we look to do is to just release that tension in that particular area. Other times there may be certain adjustments that take place. And I was talking about that earlier. Have I got my foot in the right place? Stop my knee bending in, sort of thing. Just learning to release, to let go as you sink down. Gaining the confidence in that. Changing now to the wild goose, pushing out. And sinking down. Expanding a little bit more across your solar plexus. So there's this strong interrelationship between posture and what's happening in your awareness, your intent, your simple awareness, and movement, whether you're thinking of the flow within the body, the energy within the body, maybe the movement of your breathing, whichever is sort of most appropriate for you to focus on. And they exist in a trio, a bit like if you think of a tripod that you put a camera on. It's got 3 legs. And those legs reinforce the overall effect. So you put a camera on top of a tripod. If one leg is wobbly, then the picture won't be particularly good because the tripod won't be steady. and then parting the clouds. So an awareness of your posture helps you to adjust posture. That adjusted posture gives you a freer movement. That freer movement attracts your attention and helps you to focus a little bit. And if we notice there's a blockage there, there's somewhere where there's not freer movement, that can bring our attention back to our body in the first instance, and maybe to that particular part of the body if that's appropriate. And these ideas are often presented as linear things, yeah? Mind, body, movement. In Chinese medicine, it's said that the energy will follow the thought, the body will follow the energy. I think in Tai Chi, it's more appropriate to think of them existing around the edge of a circle, you know, like parts of a wheel with a spoke leading into the center. It's the center that we're aiming for. Do one more of these. And then as you come back, go back to the first one, and then doing them as a little sequence, expanding and contracting, and then expanding and contracting, and again expanding and contracting. And I think with all of you, at times I've said, you know, you can feel it in this position and in this position, this part of the body. But we can also take it the other way. We can say, well, okay, we'll just observe, we'll do the movements. Where do you feel the expansion? It may be that later you want to adjust that. But just using the pattern really as a meditational device, as a focus for your attention. The movements, the changes within your body, keeping you alert and focused. And just gradually becoming aware of the build-up of the movement from the ground, from your feet up through your legs into belly, and then solar plexus, and then the chest. One more round. Changing now to dragon plucks the stars from the sky. If you take this approach, training your attention to, in a sense, like meditate on your body through the patterns of the movements, you'll also begin to find that you can affect the movement through that focusing of your intent. So in time, you'll realize that, say, oh, look, my shoulder's coming up. I don't want my shoulder. Okay, I'll drop my shoulder down. You use your intent to drop your shoulder when you push your arm up. And so gradually, not only do we become aware of those areas that are a bit stiff, a bit tight, a bit blocked, but we can actually begin to use the focused intent to bring about changes. Keep that simple. In the first instance, my approach is to just simply allow the movement to do its work. Oh, there's a blockage in my shoulder, but the movement through there, I imagine as a river flowing over a rock in a riverbed. And quite often that change of my relationship with the blockage in my shoulder, a change of my intent, is sufficient to just help to clear it. Other times if it keeps going, I might think, well, okay, I was talking about the breath earlier. Sometimes we imagine we can breathe into that area. And then as the body contracts, we breathe out. We imagine we're breathing out tension, the tightness. Just in the way that we're also breathing out the carbon dioxide from our lungs. Or the other way around, you can imagine breathing in a kind of fresher energy. And there's various ways that we can affect what's happening in that blocked shoulder. We might want to think about the movement. But if it becomes too, oh, I've got to do this, I've got to, oh no, it's still not working, oh, it's still not, if it becomes too frantic, then you just think, well, maybe it's time just to leave it alone. Maybe that image of the river flowing over a rock needs a little bit more time to work. So maybe I'll just think, think about some other part of the body, feel that fluidity of the movement somewhere else. This time changing to pushing in 4 directions. So, yeah. And this is the other thing, of course, that you might find that a change of movement, a different movement, different angle, actually does a better job of releasing that tightness than the first exercise where you noticed it. These methods of working with blockage in our system when we encounter it, and that could be on a kind of movement level, or it could be physical change, are sometimes divided into 2 types, described as fire and water. So the water approach, and I think the image of water flowing over a rock is a really good example of that, is a very soft approach. Water in time will wear away the rock, and that can just tick along in the background. The fire methods are more specified, they're more pushy, shall we say, like the breathing in and breathing out the tension and so on and so forth. We can go too far with either. I think they're often practiced separately, which is not a bad idea, but ideally we work between the 2. When the fire method seems to be reinforcing the tightness and the stiffness, which it can do sometimes, then we cool the fire with the water. When the water just doesn't seem to be doing anything, we maybe bring back the fire. You could describe it as a dialogue between a sort of intellectual understanding, a technical understanding, if you like, and a more intuitive one. Both are dependent on the focused attention. It's not complicated. And there isn't a kind of secret method to learn here. So much relies on that intent, that underlying awareness. Now changing. A good example of this is this exercise for me. I've been doing it for years, decades. And over the years, I've noticed various changes. One of which was quite recently, a month or 6 weeks ago, where I was just playing around with this idea of the body expanding and contracting. And I developed the intent to let the expansion push my arm out to the side. And I realized if I did that, my hand would swing up. They have to, don't they? I can't just keep moving my hand out there and keep it at the same height. So I have to lean out, which meant that I no longer had to think about lifting my arm. And as soon as I got to that point, I realized that my shoulder was much more free in doing this, which was interesting. I hadn't even realized that there was that little bit of holding in my shoulder. And then when I came to this part of the movement, I came to add the turn. I was turning much more and much more freely. I suppose you could describe that as a water type approach. I wasn't even trying to do anything about my shoulder because I hadn't really noticed that there was anything holding there. And then, so it started with, I suppose, a kind of technical thing, feeling the patterns of movement in my body and thinking, well, what happened? In fact, it didn't even start there now, I come to think of it. Initially, I was thinking, if I pull my fingers back and push the heel of my palm down, my hand goes out. That made me more aware of the expansion in that side of the body, and so on and so forth. So when we remain alert to the movements and get away from a complacency of, oh, I know this movement, I've been doing it for years, then we can discover new things. Again, if it's comfortable, add in the turn. It also, of course, has the benefits of meditation for our minds. Now I'm rowing a boat in the middle of the lake. So in the first instance, as far as the mind is concerned, we could talk about a mindful quality, just aware from one moment to the next. We soon realize that it goes a little bit beyond that, or develops from that, I should say, rather than goes beyond that. We keep that awareness with us, moment to moment, but we bring in that more analytical aspect, that sense of being able to understand both technically and intuitively. Become aware of finer and finer, more and more subtle detail of movement within the body, what's happening in our back first of all, and then maybe distinguishing between lower, middle and upper back. Maybe feeling here. I sometimes get the feeling of my spine expanding gently, and so on and so forth. One more time. And then polishing the table, turning. Nice and easy. One more time. And then shake out. From the parallel position, from the Wu Chi position, we go into a forward stance, or sometimes referred to as the bow stance or the archer stance, keeping the width of our step, and then just beginning to transfer the weight forwards and backwards. Now, this is an interesting exercise. So going back to that thing about intent and how we can change this, if like many people, and myself included, you've had issues with your knees. I damaged my knees cycling many years ago. Sometimes they're a bit stiff, and I've been times when they've been really painful, and yet I've never had to stop doing Tai Chi. It's always helped. And this exercise has been particularly good. Now, sometimes I might start off in the morning, I'm like, oh, it's a bit stiff. And I just remind myself that we refer to this as filling and emptying. When I go forward, my front leg begins to fill up with my weight. When I go backwards, my back leg begins to fill up with my weight. The key thing here being that it's filling upwards. If you put a glass under a tap and turn the water on, the water doesn't sort of go into the glass at the top and go, oh, I'm not too sure, oh, that's a bit, so the water drops straight down. I'm not suggesting that we ignore injuries, by the way, but just that we try and imagine the leg as being almost hollow. And so we release any tightness. And ideally, when you take your weight into one foot or another, the first part of the body that feels the pressure of the weight should be that area just behind the ball of your foot. It's much more easy to recognize when you're going into the front foot than into the back foot. When we go into the back foot, because the bit of my foot that my leg is attached to is at the back, the heel. So the first part of our body that physically receives the weight is going to be the heel. If I move back any further from there, I'm going to fall over. So I want my intent to be aware of where I want the weight to go. We also know that when the significance of that, the center part of the body, if for instance I'm here and I do this, I stick my bottom out, I'm going to fall over because it's actually sending my weight backwards. So we might want to think about maybe adjusting the pelvis, but perhaps more importantly, perhaps dealing with whatever's stopping the pelvis do what actually it will naturally do. If you want to work with that idea a little bit, try this outside on some bumpy ground and just listen to what's going on in the pelvis. The pelvis is an area that will adjust according to the surface that we're moving over or standing on, or indeed sitting on. So it's a very important part of the body from that point of view. Mostly not under our conscious control. And mostly the movements are too subtle for our conscious control. And then we can start to carefully raise toes and heel. This will be stronger. So one of the things you may notice is that you can get to here, like, oh, I've got 60% of my weight in my front leg. That's fine. That's it's gone through. I'm used to that. But as soon as you do this, you raise the heel. That goes up to 70 or 80. And so you're having to work harder to get that sense of release. Remembering there's always physical adjustment on the part of the body because we have to try and soften and relax in those muscles and joints that are stiffening up. This is where support can be very handy because What you don't want to do is to sit there and think, oh, right, so, oh, my knee's gone tight. I tell you what, I'll sit here for half an hour and loosen my knee. It might work. It depends how aware of these things you are, but it's quite an extreme fire method in a way. It's more or less saying to your knee, relax or else. It might be appropriate. On the other hand, it might be appropriate to be a little bit more gentle. So you go there, you think, the knee's stiffening up. Maybe if I support myself, I can find a way to release that. Maybe doing it in a chair is a useful thing to do under those circumstances. So there's no definitive right or wrong here. Stepping in. Of course, when you step, then 100% of your weight is bearing down through your leg and your foot. It may take time because those muscles that I was talking about have to condition. And if they haven't conditioned at this point, then you need to give them time to do that. Just be aware that that conditioning that I'm talking about muscles, but in fact, it's more than just the muscles that have to condition. Let's think about the muscles for the moment. And I won't say it's unique, but the way that these things are conditioned in Tai Chi is very unusual. Shake it. And have the other foot forwards. My own example is a good example because I do like to cycle. There have been times when I've cycled quite long distances, hence problems with the tendons in my knee. My legs are quite strong as a result, but I know from experience, if I were to say miss practicing Tai Chi in this stance for, let's say, a week or something like that, and then, but in that time, I cycled quite a lot. When I came back to practicing this exercise, my muscles would ache because they've gone a little bit out of condition. So when we think of Tai Chi in relation to other activities, we have to realize that our approach would always be slightly different to most other things. There's a few martial arts and some types of yoga that are compatible, I think, with that kind of mindset. And again, it's not to say that the other approaches aren't appropriate. They may well be at some point. But what they don't necessarily do is contribute to better Tai Chi. And then raising your toes and your heel. So remember, right back to the beginning, we're looking to maintain that spaciousness. So another example, if you imagine that your leg is like a tube, like a drain pipe from the side of your house. And when it's a good drain pipe, when the structure is good, then the water will flow down freely. But if somehow the part of the drain pipe got squeezed in, it would stop the water flowing down. So if, for instance, you've got kind of cyclist legs and that doesn't fill the space within that fills the space within the legs, your weight isn't going to go down. Stepping in. And then step through. And that isn't to say that we allow muscles like the quadriceps and calf muscles and so on to lose physical condition. course we don't. But we have to think about what, in a sense, the function for them is. Change direction if you haven't done so already. And then just shake out. I had an interesting example once of that thing about the space within the body and its significance when I was in a martial arts class and we were doing joint locking. I found myself working with this guy. His arms were literally twice my size. He worked out a lot and he bulging muscles and things and things like that. And I was paired up with him and I looked at his arms and I thought, I'm never going to be able to lock this guy up. You know, I'd have to really strain. And he saw me looking and he said, no, I'm no good at this. And I said, what do you mean? He said, no. He said, you wait. And he was right. I went to put a lock on and straight away it was on. And he was like, ah, it's on, it's on. And he was saying his muscles were so big, the tendons were so puffed up, and he worked out that there was no space in the joint. And since part of the thing about joint lock is that you're overextending the joint and causing pain, he didn't have enough space. So, you know, his hand would only go just a slight distance around before it was giving him pain. So in fact, in many ways, you know, he didn't have the strength to resist the rotation. He tried, but as soon as I put any pressure on, it was like, oh no, it's on kind of thing. It was quite interesting to reflect on that. Just as well we weren't doing punching at the time. I don't think I'd have had much chance. Okay, have your right foot forwards, hands on your belly. Pigeon spreads its wings. So we could argue, for instance, that one of our intents that constantly with us is to work with that sense of spaciousness all the way through the body. Seeing our body as a sort of vessel through which the movement flows. And anything that tightens up blocks that movement. The vessel has to be in good condition without a doubt. This is another one where we might find it useful for our breathing. It's certainly the feedback I've had from people is at all significant, which I believe it is. Then people have said that they find this is a good one because the expansion up through the body, belly, solar plexus and chest, gives space for the lungs to fill up. So again, you know, you can try, how does it feel when you take the in-breath? Don't slow your breathing down to match the movement if you're trying this. Either just think, oh, right, the in-breath is finished, I'll breathe out before the movement is finished. Or if you really want to synchronize breath and movement, move at the speed that you're breathing. You shouldn't be holding your breath. You move at the speed that you're breathing, and then you just allow them to slow down, allow the momentum just to drain away. Now change into fisherman castanet, coming forwards, and as you reach here, your hands swing through. You feel that little bit of expansion in the sides of your body, pushing your arms away. And that's complemented, of course, by the momentum, although that's quite subtle when you're moving slowly. One more time. Pushing wave. This is another example of an exercise where, as our intent changes, the feel of the movement can change. This is often referred to as pushing a wave, as though you're pushing against a wave. I think that's an interesting image, by the way. I'm not saying it's not relevant, but the Chinese language doesn't really include such things as a. So a more accurate translation might be, and I wouldn't guarantee this by any means, but might be pushing wave. In other words, the wave that pushes. So it's the wave coming through your body that pushes your arm down. Maybe what we can do is hold both ideas, both images side by side. And then repulse the monkey. So as you sink back, leave your right hand out in front, let the left hand follow the left hip back and turn in, and then come forwards and turn. Feel the connection from hip to shoulder to elbow on each side of your body. Left hip goes back, left shoulder goes back, left elbow goes back. And vice versa. Now your right shoulder's going back, your right elbow's going back. The way that we think about something, our intent and all the rest of it, can have a physical effect on our brain and our nervous system. So once you start to become aware of this in one exercise, notice it in others, hopefully, and we'll change over. So pigeon spreads its wings. So here, both hips are going forwards, both shoulders are going forwards, both elbows are being pushed out. Switching now to fisherman cast the net. Pushing wave, wave pushing, or pushing a wave. And then repulse the monkey. So there's a division in a sense. As you turn, it changes the way that your shoulders are moving around the circle. Think of a wheel with two spokes. When you spin it, they're moving opposite each other rather than together, but they're still connected through the center. This time you turn your front foot out. When you go forward, you may find you can turn a little bit further, and that brings your back heel up. So now you can take the step. Thing with this one is to remember that the front hand stays in position until you're ready to move the weight and turn your center. And it's that which will create this push-pull effect. And that can feel a bit awkward at first. Feels like it's not doing anything, but you'll notice that I'm rotating my arm as I turn. So here, as I turn here, that creates a rotation in the arm. But this time we're going to go back. So here, and again, as I turn, rather than the turn changing the position of the hand, it creates a rotation. So there's quite a lot going on in that arm, even though it's not sort of changing its position dramatically. Bring your feet parallel. Shake out. Rub your hands together. Tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. Down to one shoulder. Arm. On the side. Onto your back. Hips. Belly. The upper body. So I mentioned the Wu Chi posture earlier, and we have that sense of stillness, spaciousness, whatever. We can use that to establish that in a relatively simple way. Embrace tiger, return to mountain. So pushing up, attempting to rename it, embrace tiger, return to Wu Chi. We sort of come back to those qualities. We can't keep them the whole time. All sorts of things get in the way, disrupt those qualities, or perhaps disrupt is the wrong term, it's too negative a term, affect those qualities. But we learn to come back, we learn what is required, what intent do we want? What do we feel physically in the body when we're coming back to this? I'm not going to try and answer that because it's a very personal thing, I think. But yeah, what is your intent? What does this exercise offer you in those terms? And then just stand. And shake out. Thank you very much, everybody. That was very quick. As